This piece begins in a way where we see a performer from a very unusual angle, right from the beginning. We have a point of view as the audience that we don't usually have. And there are multiple layers to that, because it's also true the way that video is used in this is kind of constantly changing our point of view and perspective. And I think that is the greatest value of this work, sort of shaking up our normal point of view, our conventional perspective, and to reconsider that, to reconsider how we look at things. Who is Robyn Orlin? So she is a performance artist from South Africa. She was born in 1955 during apartheid in South Africa, and she really came into fullness as an artist in that crucible of apartheid, of racialized segregation. And as the country went from apartheid into the new dispensation, which was, we date that from 1994 when the elections happened, that was a time when many artists were having to kind of break apart conventions, because so many of the theatrical conventions and the dance conventions were so intimately entwined with white supremacy. And so Robyn Orlin is really known as someone who broke a lot of rules and questioned a lot of the boundaries of how dance was practiced and produced and consumed. And I would say dance, even more than theater, was very, very racially segregated under apartheid. Theater had a tradition of cross-racial collaborations. That was less common in dance. And I think Robyn Orlin very much brought that spirit into dance, really mixing with conventions and also moving across racial boundaries. She's mixing up dance and theater, and we didn't even have a word for it then, but it's performance art. And so people didn't really know how to process what she was doing. Albert Ibokwe Khoza is from a different generation. He also is South African. He's a Black South African, so Robyn is white. And he is someone who identifies as a sangoma, which is a kind of spirit medium, and an Inyanga, which is a healer. So he has those identities. He is Black, he is queer, he's sort of gender queer. When you see him in this performance, it's sort of hard to place his body. He's very large. He's large in all ways. His body is large, his personality is large, and Albert got a degree in theater, and sort of interestingly I think there's a lot of, though he's from a different generation than Robyn Orlin, I think it's very similar. He's a similar artist in the sense of really questioning the kind of boxes that we put around things. The piece has, I would say, sort of 4 different movements within it, and the first piece is very much like a chrysalis, a kind of we are introduced to Albert from an unusual angle and from multiple angles. So videotape is used in this with projections. So it operates with issues of scale and changing a point of view from us. And we also see a kind of unraveling or unfurling, a revelation of him that is quite extraordinary, probably unlike anything anyone has seen in theater before. Part 2 is Albert engaging with the audience in a very humorous way with a kind of purification. And so that is a different point of engagement. The third part brings in much larger forces in terms of the way that Africa has been a site for extractive economies, particularly in South Africa around gold and diamonds. It's not mentioned, but it's worth us remembering that our cell phones are full of coltan, which is a precious resource that is found particularly like in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then the final part of, I would say, the 4-part structure takes us much more directly into a kind of ritual. And very often rituals involve different sorts of body painting and fluids. And so for me, that's a much more, thinking about this as a ritual is a much more salient way in. And I think a question that I would suggest might be helpful is for one to consider as an audience member, what are the forces at work and being summoned in this work? And how does the performance guide us to perceive those differently? Advanced publicity around this work does talk about its relationship to the idea of the 7 deadly sins. And I would just have to say for myself, that isn't a framework that illuminates this piece. For me, this work is about Albert through and through. Albert is a Black queer man, as someone who is proudly himself, who is confident in that revelation of himself, confident in how he engages with the audience and sort of reverses roles, often having white audience members who are created as his servant. He is confident and bold in summoning a figure like Vladimir Putin, and a sense that he is entitled to speak directly to someone like that and to take on issues of homophobia. And so this piece is, for me, it's Albert through and through, a very proud person. And I see nothing in that presentation that is a deadly sin. Remember that in South Africa, to create performing arts in South Africa under apartheid, and especially if performing arts were multiracial, was to break the law. What that means is 2 things. One is that I think the artists had to be really clear and bold about what they were doing and why they were doing it, because you risk imprisonment and incarceration. The other is that performances had to be incredibly spare. It had to be spare because if you were rehearsing or having a performance and the security police showed up, it had to become not a performance instantly. Maybe it was a church meeting, maybe it was a class. So this is, I think, a really distinctive part of South African theater, is just how spare it is, and this is a spare work. There aren't a lot of props, there isn't scenery, it's a very spare work. Here in the North, in the global North, in a place like Seattle, where we are experiencing this work, it is bringing us work from the global South, from a place very far away, and yet we are connected. This work is outside the box for Meany, and I just want to applaud Meany for moving boldly into a different kind of aesthetic space. Things will happen that might make you worried, like worried for the performer or worried as an audience member. But what I can say emphatically is that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, and parts of it will be really funny, and parts of it will take you to places you haven't been before.